Back in high school, my cross country coach hit a phase where for 2 weeks he tried to convince the entire team to go vegan with him. And over that span, we watched a lot of documentaries, but only one of them really stood out to me. And this one was called Food Inc. They talked about all the problems in the current food industry as well as a possible solution. So today we're going to talk about the differences between traditional and organic farming practices, their environmental impact, as well as differences in the actual product itself. So to start, a traditional farm is all about producing as much and losing as little food as possible. So to produce as much, they use things like fertilizers, GMO, growth hormones, and a bunch of other things to just sort of get food out as fast as possible. And they use things like pesticides and antibiotics to lose as little food to pests and disease as possible. And one example of this is in a normal farm where for 6 to 8 months, the cattle lives on a pasture. And then the last 4 to 6 months, it lives on a food lot where all it does is eat food and sort of sit in a square until it's big enough to be shipped off. And to understand to understand how organic food came to be, we have to realize it started in the 50s, but didn't really gain any traction until the 70s when people started caring about things like the environment and food. And then as of 2013, Spins, an organic analysis company, has found that the industry's been growing by 70% every year for a while now. And so organic food, it has to be grown with no GMOs, no antibiotics, no pesticides or fertilizers. And this is all to sort of reduce the environmental impact as well as just promote a healthier product. And and in the cattle industry, this can be shown because all of the cattle has to be raised in organic land, has to eat organic food, and has to have year-round access to the outdoors. But it also can have no antibiotics, which means that no superbugs can be formed by making them all resistant to antibiotics. But a normal flu could have a much bigger effect on that individual farm. And so now that we have an idea of like differences in the actual farming practices and what qualifies as organic food, let's talk about how they affect the environment. So a traditional farm can use things like chemical pesticides and fertilizers. And Bickel and Spicer, which is some research duo, has found that chemical fertilizers tend to drift off of their own farm and can hit other farms next to them. That means that even an organic farm can sometimes end up with pesticides on them. And this just sort of shows that they have a much broader effect than just the individual farm. And that sort of can lead to problems. Another known issue is that Bonsdorf has cited that fertilizer runoff is a big cause of eutrophication, and this is a process where too much phosphorus and nitrogen end up in a lake or any body of water and leads to big algal blooms, and they end up sucking up all of the oxygen in the lake and killing all of the fish and plants that live in it. And like I said, fertilizer is a known cause of this, but there are other things like sewage runoff just in cities and whatnot. But overall, just the product leaving the farm tends to show that there's a bigger effect in play. And then now to an organic farm, since it has no pesticides and no fertilizers, they have to utilize other strategies. And the Proceedings of the Nutrition Society out in Cambridge has found some of them. So to combat no pesticides, really the only solution is to just send out other bugs that eat the littler bugs, and that ends up being ladybugs often. But there's still going to be a lot more worms and just other things. It's going to be a lot more of an active environment. So what ends up happening is it ends up retaining a lot more water than a normal farm does. And then since there's no fertilizers, they have to prevent as little runoff as possible. So they'll use a lot of cover crops and they'll rotate crops to use the land more efficiently. And they'll also plant things like legumes or other things to just boost the fertility of the land itself. So overall, a normal organic farm will run a lot more efficiently than a traditional farm. Now that we have an idea of the impact on the environment and how they're different, let's talk about the actual differences in the product itself. So to start, traditional food is going to be a lot cheaper. This is because they can produce so much more of it, and a normal farm is sort of built efficiently. It's very optimized. So you can go into Walmart and you can get Tyson chicken for $4 a pound. But if I wanted organic chicken, it's going to be $6.50 a pound. So what's the main reason that people still buy organic whenever it's that much more expensive? First off, it's like the morality behind that chicken itself, right? You know that the company is treating the environment better and it's also treating its animals better. You don't have to worry about them being stuck in a food lot for the rest of their lives. They're allowed to go outdoors. They're allowed to do things. And so that's one of the big reasons for organic being a thing in the first place. And one of the other things you'll hear a lot is, oh, it's healthier. But that's not necessarily the case. There are differences in the product. You'll find that a lot more of the produce tend to have more antibiotics in it, and a lot more of the meats tend to have more omega-3 fatty acids. But that's not really enough to justify and sell it as healthier. It's a really minor difference. And the only other really big change is just sometimes organic food just tastes better. It's really all up to the individual, but for me personally, I can taste the differences between cheap eggs and nice eggs and cheap chicken and nice chicken. So that's really the only other reason to buy the nicer product, is just for a better taste and for supporting a better company. So now that you know a little bit more about organic food, I hope the next time you go to any Walmart or any other grocery store, you'll look into it a little bit more and maybe decide to try it out, even if it does cost a bit more.